Dot ran through the towering, carved iron gates, then re-entered the kitchen, located in a corner of the property, along a winding path through the green lawn.
Mum, I'm home.
Dot's excited shout made her mother, Diana, look up.
Shh. Keep it down, Dot. There's a lot of guests in there.
Diana warned in a hurry. Dot hurriedly shut her mouth and shrugged before giving a mischievous smile.
Are they Mrs. Guests?
Dot inquired curiously before helping her mum put the pastries on a plate. Diana shook her head.
Not Mrs. Guest. It's Master and Madam's only son who's back from abroad while they've invited other guests.
Wow, that handsome boy. His picture is hanging on the wall in the living room, isn't it, Mum?
Dot continued to follow up innocently. Diana nodded and then picked up the tray with the snacks.
You change first, then go help Mummy in the kitchen.
Diana's order caused Dot to immediately run to her room located in the attic, while Diana immediately and skillfully brought the afternoon tea to the living room. Dot carefully ironed the maid's garments she wore around the estate and then meticulously combed her hair. Dot was only a servant's child, but her mother's employers were kind enough to allow her to attend school. If there was no homework after school, Dot would help her mother with her chores. Dot walked to the kitchen and immediately opened the fridge, grabbed some vegetables, and then patiently washed them. How come I never knew that child labor is still employed inside this manure? Dot's body stiffened when she heard a man's voice from behind her.
Are you deaf?
Dot took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. She then gathered a bit of courage and slowly turned her body towards the man behind her.
I'm sorry, sir.
Keep your face up when you talk.
Dot bit her lower lip in fear. Why did the man in front of her sound so harsh and cranky? Had she done something wrong?
Why didn't you say a word?
Dot tried to act calm, even though she was scared half to death. Dot lifted her face, but kept her eyes closed. It would be more difficult to speak while looking directly into the other's face.
My name is Dot. My mother's name is Diana. She is the maid in this manor.
Strangely, her words received no response. Why was it so quiet? Had that man left already? Out of curiosity, Dot slowly opened her eyes. Vaguely, she felt a tall figure facing her against the light. After her eyes adjusted to the light, she found a man with incomparably handsome features surveying her from above.
How old are you?
The man spoke, his voice unusually mellow.
19, sir.
Dot answered in a small voice, not sure why, but with a simple glance, she sank into the man's aura. She couldn't even muster the strength a little.
Sir, how did you get into the kitchen? Only the servants and the master's family are allowed in here.
This is my house. I am free to go anywhere, including the kitchen.
The man actually laughed as if he heard a joke. Dot realized that she had said the wrong thing and immediately apologized.
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know.
Make me a cup of coffee and bring it to my room.
Dot said, okay, with her head down. The footsteps were far away, and Dot finally breathed a sigh of relief before hurriedly picking up the cup to make the coffee. After making the coffee, Dot immediately carried it out of the kitchen. She had heard from her mother that there was a large, luxurious room with all the amenities on the first floor of the building with a garden to the north. She subconsciously assumed that this was the men's bedroom, so she served her coffee and prepared to take her chances.
Sir.
Dot knocked on the door of the room on the first floor with her coffee in teary tongue.
Enter.
Dot pushed the door open and bowed politely at the door before stepping inside.
Put it on table.
Dot immediately obliged and placed the coffee on the table next to the laptop.
Sir, your coffee is here. I'll leave you to it.
Dot said softly, and then intended to leave the room.
Stop.
Dot stopped and looked at the man questioningly. The man got up, walked over to the door, and locked it.
Young master, you.
An ominous feeling rose in Dot's mind.
Call me Humphrey,
the man said as he walked towards Dot. Dot shook her head in panic. She could no longer hear anything the man was saying. She protested timidly.
Sir, I have to go. Please open the door.
My parents want me to marry the woman of their choice.
Humphrey suddenly smiled to himself.
But I don't want to. I'm tired being their puppet. They decided my school, my college, my job, even my marriage.
Humphrey said before approaching Dot again.
Sir, calm down.
Dot whispered as she stepped back. Dot's panicked reaction, like a white rabbit, made Humphrey laugh. He looked at the shivering little girl with interest, like a lion looking out of the corner of its eye at its prey.
I also have to thank you, because after seeing you, I thought of a way to disrupt my parents' plans.
Dot swallowed hard, and her hunch was right. Humphrey's gaze darkened as he continued.
I'd like to see how they'll react when they find out I got the maid's daughter pregnant.
Kept stepping backward while moving closer to the tabletop, then fumbling behind her back for the keys on the table. She finally felt for the key to the door lock, but Humphrey held her wrist, and the key was easily snatched away.
Sir, I beg you.
Dot's eyes were already filled with tears. Her features looked even more moving under the panic, and the curves of her good-looking body were hidden under the loose maid's outfit. The girl's tender appearance did not arouse Humphrey's sympathy. On the contrary, it made his body even hotter. He picked up Dot as if he were picking up a doll.
Don't, sir, don't.
Dot shouted as she slapped Humphrey on the back. But it didn't cause any pain to Humphrey's broad shoulders. Humphrey threw Dot onto the bed and promptly pinned her down, yanking her hands so hard that the adolescent girl's developing snow-white breasts blossomed like buds before his eyes, and Humphrey greedily kissed them.
Don't, sir.
Desperately shielded the softness of her breasts with one hand, even though they were fully exposed to the man's eyes, and tried to push him away with the other. Those two hands are such a nuisance, Humphrey thought as he stood up all over again and pulled down the tie around his neck before grabbing Dot's arms and tying them.
I'm sorry, but you have to carry my child.
Dot could only meet round after round of thrusts from the man on top of her with weak cries. But who knows how long Humphrey had been toying with her body? Who knows how many times the warm liquid had filled her womb? What was clear was that Dot was exhausted and no longer able to resist, as if she were a broken rag doll.
You, so delicious.
Humphrey needed Dot's breasts, swollen even more by the sex hormones, which were already covered in his teeth marks.
You look so much like a cat in heat.
Dot closed her eyes as she felt Humphrey's ramming becoming more and more inhumane. Dot cried out as her body convulsed violently. Her hands tightened their grip on Humphrey's hair. Humphrey kisses Dot's ear, gently tearing at Dot's earlobe. Dot moaned intensely, with her eyes tightly closed as the intense pleasure spread throughout her body. Humphrey smiled slightly as he watched Dot's body react. It seemed that the little girl had had the first orgasm of her life. However, he had no intention of letting her go. He moved faster and faster instead. What greeted her was the release of desire for who knows how many times. Humphrey put his hands on Dot's hips and picked her up. At this point, Dot had no strength left and simply lay prostrate on top of Humphrey, allowing her body to be attacked once again by Humphrey in a standing position. An hour later, Humphrey, too, had once again reached his final release. Humphrey knew that the girl underneath him was really enjoying this adult play. After all was quiet, Humphrey quickly rushed into the bathroom. Humphrey was in the bathroom for about 20 minutes, and when he came out, the girl was gone. Humphrey was surprised that the girl had the strength to escape from the room after such an intense workout. Truth be told, any girl before him would not have had the strength to even take more than 3 steps after making love to him. Humphrey quickly put those nagging thoughts to rest, for now he was more concerned about whether or not the girl was pregnant. What would his parents say when the time came? Would they force Dot to have an abortion? Or would they demand that Dot have the baby and hold them responsible for being parents? Humphrey smiled slightly. He couldn't wait to see his parents' reaction. But the smile faded when it suddenly occurred to him that Dot might not be pregnant. Humphrey clenched his fists and glanced at the door. That meant he'd have to make love to Dot a lot until he was sure she was pregnant. Dot, who had just entered the room, hurried towards the bathroom. She couldn't care less about the pain all over her body, especially in her lower body. On arriving at the bathroom and closing the door, Dot immediately sat down on the floor as her legs were wobbly and she had no strength to stand up. Dot covered her mouth tightly with a towel as a whimper escaped her tiny mouth.
Why?
Dot sobbed softly with tears in her eyes. Why did the young master do this to her? She was just a student who wished to achieve her goal.
What should I do?
Dot's sobs became more and more confused. There was no way she could tell her mom. Mom would kill her if she knew she was doing such slutty things. And if her employer found out about it, they could be fired too. That was Dot's biggest fear of what would happen. She and her mom had managed to find an easy job with an objective salary, not to mention the fact that the master and mistress treated them well. Knock, knock.
Dot, are you in there?
Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and it was her mother asking at the door. Dot, who was crying, hurriedly wiped her tears.
Mom, I'm in.
Are you taking a bath? Come and help Mummy make the cake when you're done with your bath, because the master is having a welcome party for Master Humphrey tonight.
Dot pinched her thighs and tried to control her sobbing, but couldn't stop.
Yes, Mum. Okay, Mum. Okay. Take a shower and go straight to the kitchen.
Dot didn't respond again as she heard footsteps fading away. Dot desperately wiped the tears from her eyes, trying to stop the sobbing, and she couldn't cry or her mum would find out. Dot didn't want to burden her mum. After a few minutes, Dot used all her strength to try and stand up and clean herself with what little strength she had left. She chalked it all up to a dream, and when she woke up, she just had to remember to stay away from Humphrey at all times. After showering and getting dressed, Dot headed straight for the kitchen, though she was still a little unsteady on her feet. Due to her weak legs, Dot tried to walk as normally as possible. Couldn't let anyone get suspicious of her. Arriving in the kitchen, Dot walked over to her mum.
I'm coming, Mom.
Deanna turned her head and pointed to the fruit.
Just cut the fruit into small pieces.
Dot nodded and walked towards the fruit table. As she turned her head, her mum suddenly called out to her.
What's the matter, child? Does your foot hurt?
Dot moved nervously, and it turned out to be the bruise Humphrey had left on her right leg, showing short.
I fell in the bathroom, Mom.
Dot scrambled to cover up. Deanna nodded and continued to focus on her chore at hand.
Maybe the bathroom floor was too slippery. Let me clean the bathroom later,
Deanna said as she stirred the batter for the cake.
Okay, Mom,
said Dot as she started to cut the fruit. Before she knew it, 3 hours had passed. Dot handed her mum the already decorated cake embryo. Diana held her daughter's decorated cake and was full of praise.
My daughter is so artistically talented. Debbie, can you help Mum?
Dot turned her head.
how can I help you?
Diana quickly cut off 2 pieces of cake and put them on 2 plates.
Let's go deliver the cake to Madam and young master respectively. I'll go deliver it to Madam and you go deliver it to Mr. Humphrey.
Dot's eyes widened and she took a step backwards.
But, Mom,
Come on, Dot. It's not nice to keep Mr. Humphrey waiting.
But my foot hurts, Mum, and I can't go up the stairs.
Dot said as she squatted down and rubbed her leg, making an excuse.
Mr. Humphrey is in the parlor taking care of business. No need for you to go up the stairs to him. Come on! This is not a matter to be put off.
Dot could only nod hopelessly and walked out of the kitchen, then slowly towards the living room. Dot's steps stopped when she saw Humphrey sitting and concentrating on business. Dot took a breath in and let it out slowly, then shakily walked over to Humphrey.
sir, it's cake.
Dot said softly, then hurriedly placed the plate with the cake on the table. Humphrey looked at Dot and smiled slightly.
Am I so terrible?
Humphrey's sudden question silenced Dot, but took a step back.
I'm sorry, sir.
Dot said politely, then prepared to leave, but suddenly her hand was pulled.
Sir.
Dot's eyes widened immediately, followed by a pair of strong arms imprisoning her body. Humphrey pulled Dot towards him and kissed her on the lips. The light, affordable rose-flavored lipstick was surprisingly sweet when mixed with the characteristic milky scent of a young girl. After a long time, Humphrey stopped kissing, alone savoring the wonderful fragrance left on his lips. Dot's lips were already red and swollen. Looking at Dot with an innocent look on her face, Humphrey laughed, then released the hug, and Dot took the opportunity to get up and run out of the living room.
Oh my God, I can't believe she can still run.
Humphrey thought in amazement.
Is she too strong, or am I losing my powers?
Dot looked at her mom, who was busy cutting and arranging the cake on a plate. The party was just around the corner, but all the food was not yet neatly arranged on the table. Dot could see that her mom was overwhelmed by doing everything herself.
Dottie, please take all the plates outside. Arrange them neatly on the table.
Nodded and picked up the push table in the corner of the kitchen. With that table, she could carry many plates at once. When she was done, Dot pushed the table out of the kitchen. Dot could see the living room that had been decorated so beautifully. In flickering lights and beautiful flowers, Dot sighed and started arranging the cake plates on the table.
Dot got
turned her head when she heard someone calling her name, and it was Helene.
Yes, madam?
Helene approached and handed Dot a paper bag, received it confused.
What is this, madam?
Party dress. Put it on and enjoy the party tonight.
Dot shook her head.
But I have to help Mum in the kitchen, mistress. It's not appropriate for a servant's daughter like me to join the party.
All the workers in this house will be guests at my son's welcoming party, including your mother, Dottie. So don't worry about the kitchen and make up your face as pretty as possible.
After saying that, Helene walked away, leaving Dot to stop arguing with her mistress. After all, it was no surprise that Helene's mistress was known to be very kind to the workers in this house. Having finished arranging the plates, Dot hurried to the kitchen to get the rest of the plates. But when she arrived in the kitchen, Dot was surprised by the presence of many people in servant uniforms. They all moved quickly to prepare food and drinks. Not finding her mother, Dot decided to go back to her room.
Mum.
Dot called when she saw her mother trying on new clothes.
Did Mistress Helene give you new clothes too, child?
Diana asked, causing Dot to nod and close her bedroom door.
Madam was very kind. She gave all the workers in the house new clothes and allowed us to join Lord Humphrey's party tonight,
Diana said, and put her new clothes in the wardrobe, then moved to get the massage oil bottle.
Come here, let me massage your feet,
Diana said, making Dot walk backwards, then shook her head.
No need, Mum. It doesn't hurt any more anyway.
Really?
Nodded, making Diana put the oil bottle.
Then get some rest, and I'll clean the bathroom,
Diana said, and walked into the bathroom. Artisantine breathed a sigh of relief and lay down on the bed until she fell asleep.
Dot, wake up.
Diana's call made Dot open her eyes slowly.
Yes, Mum?
Hurry up and shower and get ready, son. The party is coming soon.
Dot woke up and shook her head.
Mum, Dot doesn't have to come. Dot's body is not feeling well.
Her body was indeed very tired.
Sick? Do you need to go to the hospital? Yes, let me get permission from Helene first. You wait for me.
There's no need to go to the hospital, Mum. Dot is just tired.
Dot interrupted, causing Diana to stroke her daughter's head.
That's all right. Just rest, and I'll tell Helene that you're sick.
Diana hurried to get some warm water and a medicine box and placed them on the bedside table.
Take the medicine later. I'm going out first.
Dot closed her eyes, then nodded and opened them again when her mum came out of the room.
I'm sorry, Mum, but Dot doesn't want to see Mr. Humphrey again.
At the party venue, Humphrey's eyes were constantly searching for the girl who had caught his eye.
What's wrong, boy?
Asked Helene, who had been watching his son's movements.
Are all the workers in the house here?
I'm very proud of you, Humphrey. I thought that after living abroad for so long, my son would be a proud man, but he's not. You even thought of the house workers and allowed them to join this party, even though I didn't think of it myself.
Just smiled at his mum's words.
Let's go. We have to welcome the guests. Introducing my son Humphrey. He has just finished his master's in America,
Helene said proudly to one of her friends.
Wow, very handsome. Too bad I don't have a daughter.
What a pity.
Humphrey chuckled inwardly, but still put on a smile. His mood suddenly soured because he didn't see Dot anywhere. The party was about to start.
Attention all.
Helene immediately pulled his son's arm to approach his husband, who was standing on the stage. Thank you all for your presence. We, the Bascoro family, are very pleased that today I can proudly introduce my son to you all. Mr. Bascoro patted Humphrey's shoulder proudly.
As many of you may not know, Humphrey has been living in America since the age of 16. He completed his high school, undergraduate, and postgraduate studies there. We wish our son the best education. And my son will start at the company next week. I hope he can replace my position as soon as possible, because as you can see, I'm old enough to take care of the company. At my age, I should be spending more time with my grandchildren, not with files that are piling up like mountains.
Laughter and applause could be heard in the party room.
And because of that, we would like to announce my son's engagement to...
Wait.
Humphrey interrupted loudly.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Mrs. Helene patted Humphrey on the shoulder.
I would introduce you to my friend's daughter.
Introduce, not engaged.
It's the same thing, son. Besides, I'm sure you'll like Sylvia. She's a good and beautiful girl.
Humphrey shook his head in disbelief, even more so when a woman suddenly stood next to him. Helene smiled and whispered.
You two are very compatible.
Sylvia smiled.
Thank you, Auntie.
Humphrey held his breath and walked backwards.
Humphrey will go back to the room,
Humphrey said, then hurriedly left the party and climbed the stairs to his room. Mr. and Mrs. Bascoro immediately smiled at the guests.
Forgive us. It seems our son is a little surprised by this sudden engagement,
Helene said, and took Sylvia's arm.
We'll have a big engagement party later,
Helene said, making Sylvia smile kindly. Humphrey, on the other hand, immediately went berserk in his room. All the items on the table were thrown to the floor. All the figurines were even broken by his punch. The room had not even taken shape anymore. Humphrey inhaled and exhaled harshly. Why was it always like this? His parents had always controlled his life, sending him abroad at a young age, leaving him like an orphan in a foreign land, and now the matter of marriage was also arranged. What exactly is his function in this house? Was he just a tool and a puppet? Humphrey clenched his fist. Just once he wanted to win over his parents. This time, Humphrey made sure that his parents' plan to marry him off would not work. Humphrey ate his breakfast quietly. Occasionally, he could see his parents signaling each other to talk.
Humphrey.
Humphrey looked at his father.
There will be a dinner with Sylvia's family tonight. I hope you can make the time.
A week had passed after his welcome party, and now his parents were again discussing arranged marriages.
Are you really gonna force me?
Made Sylvia a few times, son. If it doesn't work out, then fine. We won't force it any more.
Humphrey picked up his drinking glass and downed it.
When can I refuse your wishes?
Where are you going, son? Finish your breakfast first.
I have to get ready for the office,
Humphrey said flatly, and left the dining room.
It seems Humphrey is not happy with this arranged marriage,
Helene said, making Bascoro chuckle.
Weren't you the one who wanted Humphrey to get married the most? And now you are complaining about Humphrey's displeasure?
Bascoro mocked, making Helene sigh.
I only want the best for Humphrey. I want him to be happy, and I believe Sylvia is the right woman for Humphrey.
Then let's continue the arranged marriage. Humphrey is acting like this, maybe because he doesn't know Sylvia well yet. Papa thinks Humphrey will quickly adjust after the engagement.
I hope so. I really want to see Humphrey married to Sylvia.
While in the room, Humphrey was tidying up his appearance. Today was his first day at work, but unfortunately at breakfast, his parents had brought up the subject of arranged marriages again after a week of silence. Humphrey had to scramble to think of a way to thwart his parents' plans. Yes, only Dot can be used as a tool to cancel the damn match, but the problem was, a week had passed and Humphrey had never seen the girl again. She must be avoiding him. Humphrey clenched his fists and walked out of the room. He would think about it later. Now he had to go to the office. Arriving at the office, Humphrey went straight to his room. It was a very large room, considering he was immediately promoted to the position of director. There was no welcoming ceremony or introduction, because, to be honest, he was not in a good condition to do that. Humphrey closed the last document he had to sign and called his secretary to collect it.
Is there anything else?
Nothing, sir.
Humphrey nodded, and then tidied up his appearance to get ready to go home.
I'll go home first.
Humphrey rushed to the car park after arriving at the first floor. Humphrey drove his car quickly. He had to get home soon to find Dot's whereabouts. Finally, after driving for about half an hour, the luxury car entered the yard. Humphrey hurriedly got out and ran through the house to the kitchen. Humphrey could see that Dot's mum was cooking. Deanna turned her head when she heard someone's voice.
Young master, what's wrong, sir?
Humphrey shook his head and walked away from there, and without anyone knowing, he walked towards the back building. Humphrey walked slowly and looked carefully at each door. Humphrey chuckled, as each room was so closed that it was invisible from the outside.
A young master.
Humphrey turned his head in surprise when he heard someone's voice. Humphrey turned his head and smiled.
Why are you here, young master? Did you need something?
I'm looking for the worker in charge of cooking. I want to eat something.
The man nodded and pointed to a door.
Oh, that's it, young master. It's Diana's room.
Humphrey smiled and walked towards the door, but was stopped by the worker who had told him.
Well, don't go there, young master. There's Mrs. Diana's daughter inside, and you'll be mistaken for something else.
Humphrey nodded, as he already knew Dot's room.
Let me find Mrs. Diana and tell her if you want something cooked. But usually at this hour, Diana is in the kitchen, sir, so let me take care of it.
No need. I'll go to the kitchen.
Humphrey entered his room and stepped into the bathroom to clean himself up. Tonight he had to see Dot and confirm that she was pregnant with his child. This time Humphrey had to win at all costs. His parents can't have their way, especially since they have been managing his life for quite some time. In the evening, Humphrey had made sure his appearance looked perfect. He had even shaved and sprayed perfume. Knock, knock. Humphrey looked up when he heard a knock on the door. Helene entered and smiled slightly at his son's appearance.
Come on down. Sylvia's family is waiting downstairs.
Humphrey glared and chuckled to himself. He forgot about his dinner. His mum must be thinking the wrong thing after seeing his appearance. Humphrey was forced to obey and followed Helene's lead. Boscoro smiled as Humphrey and Helene arrived in the living room.
Sit down.
Boscoro's command made Humphrey obey. He sat between his parents.
Look at my son's appearance. He never dressed this neatly,
Helene said, causing everyone to burst into laughter.
Understood. Shy.
Interjected Jenny, Sylvia's mother.
That's right. What then? Do you want to have a wedding or engagement first?
Asked Helene, making Humphrey clench his hands tightly.
Whatever. Besides, our daughter seems to like your son very much.
Really? In that case, let's just get married. Right, Pa?
Helene asked for her husband's approval.
If both prospective couples agree, then we will hold the wedding as soon as possible.
Helene looked at Sylvia.
How is it, dear? Do you agree if the wedding's held in 3 weeks?
Agreed, Auntie. The sooner the better, right?
Helene smiled and held Humphrey's arm.
How about it, son?
Humphrey smiled sarcastically. 3 more weeks. That was enough time to confirm Dot's pregnancy. Humphrey nodded in agreement, making everyone smile happily. Helene was even more excited. He knew his son wouldn't let him down.
Well done, son. Thank you. Mummy will be very happy if you can get married and give Mummy a grandchild soon.
He was indeed getting married, but not to Sylvia, but to Dart. He wanted to see how his parents would react when they found out that their proud son had impregnated a maid's daughter. The conversation continued about the wedding. They even talked about the guests they wanted to invite. Humphrey rolled his eyes boredly and glanced at Biane, who had just served the cake. Humphrey smiled slyly and stood up.
Where are you going?
Humphrey hinted that he needed to use the bathroom, and Helene nodded. Humphrey followed Diana, who walked towards the kitchen. Diana turned around.
Yes, sir.
Can you make me some coffee?
Yes, sir. I'll make it in a minute.
Humphrey nodded and sat in a chair. So it wasn't long before Diana arrived with a cup of coffee.
Here you go, sir.
Humphrey nodded, and without Diana's knowledge, he put 2 sleeping pills in his coffee.
Diana.
Humphrey called, making Diana come back to her young master.
I don't want more coffee. Please make some milk.
Diana nodded and went back to making milk. When she finished making the milk, she placed it in front of Humphrey. Humphrey drank the milk and then pushed the coffee cup.
Diana, you can drink the coffee. Otherwise it will be wasted.
Humphrey said and stood up to leave the kitchen. Humphrey stood outside the kitchen door. He had to make sure Diana drank her coffee. A smile appeared on Humphrey's face as she drank her coffee.
Good.
Humphrey murmured happily and walked out of the kitchen area. Humphrey walked silently towards the back building. Humphrey closed the door as soon as he heard Dot's voice. The girl must have thought it was her mum who opened the door. Humphrey smiled at the sight of Dot's plump body lying on the bed. The girl was probably doing some school work. It was obvious that she was very serious about writing something in her book.
Ah.
Dot screamed spontaneously as something big fell on her back. Ah! Dot's body stiffened as she heard a man's voice. Dot turned her head. Then Humphrey quickly covered Dot's mouth and took something out of his trouser pocket. Humphrey smiled slyly, then smothered Dot's nose and mouth with his anesthetist handkerchief. Dot struggled for a while until her body relaxed and her eyes closed. He had to play fast. A sudden moan from Dot's lips made Humphrey stop his movements. Humphrey looked down to align his face with Dot's. Dot sighed with her eyes slowly opening. Dot glared as she saw Humphrey's masterly face in front of her. Dot reflexively pushed Humphrey's body with both hands and almost shouted, but Humphrey only smiled slightly, and then immediately covered Dot's lips with his lips. Dot moaned as her lips were silenced by Mr. Humphrey's wild kiss, while her hands were pressed above her head. Humphrey broke the kiss and silenced Dot's lips with his palms, then moved his lower body brutally. After all these, Humphrey got off the bed and put on his clothes. Humphrey glanced at Dot, who was sobbing with a shaking body. There was a slight sense of unease, but he brushed it all away. After all, he would eventually take responsibility by marrying Dot.
Don't cry.
Humphrey said coldly, and picked up Dot's clothes that were scattered on the floor. Humphrey sighed and approached Dot. Humphrey hugged Dot's body that was shaking from crying from behind. Humphrey kissed Dot's smooth back and whispered,
I'm sorry.
Humphrey said sincerely and stroked Dot's stomach. Humphrey really hoped that a small duplicate of himself would grow in Dot's womb. Humphrey was silent. He also did not know, was what he did really because he wanted to foil his parents' plans, or was there something else? For example, he was interested in Dot. Humphrey tightened his embrace.
Listen, I'll take responsibility.
Humphrey said, making Dot shake her head, still sobbing. Humphrey knew that Dot didn't believe his words. Humphrey sighed and got out of bed.
Stop crying and remember not to let anyone know what we did.
Humphrey said, then stepped towards the door.
Because it's only your loss if everyone finds out.
Humphrey said, then completely left the room, leaving Dot, who was still sobbing violently.
Where were you last night, son? Why weren't you in the room?
Humphrey stopped eating and looked at his mum, who just asked.
I slept in the study.
Mama has an appointment with a jewelry designer. Go with Sylvia and...
Today. Sorry, Ma, but I have to go to the office.
Go. I'll take care of the office.
Bascoro's interjection made Humphrey pause and continue eating without giving any response. After all, it was useless to make excuses. When his parents are determined, it will be difficult to avoid it. After breakfast, Humphrey immediately picked Sylvia up at her house. There was only silence in the car. Indeed, Sylvia occasionally asked questions, but Humphrey only answered casually.
Why are you here? Didn't you tell me?
Ignoring Sylvia's questions, Humphrey got out and stepped into the jewelry shop run by his friend. Sylvia ran to match his pace. Humphrey and Sylvia stepped into the VIP room.
You can choose the ring you like,
Humphrey said as soon as they sat down. Sylvia enthusiastically looked at some pictures of jewelry designs.
How about this design?
Good, good,
Humphrey replied without looking at the jewelry design. Sylvia smiled awkwardly, then went back to choosing some ring designs that she thought were good.
How about this one?
Humphrey gave Sylvia a sharp look, and then pointed to one of the ring designs.
This one,
Humphrey said flatly, making Sylvia frown because the ring design chosen by Humphrey was very ordinary and simple.
But...
I prefer the simple one.
Okay, that's it,
Sylvia said resignedly, and immediately measured her ring finger for the ring.
You can go back to the car first.
Maybe Humphrey wanted to change the jewelry design to surprise her. Sylvia thought happily. After Sylvia left, Humphrey took something out of his coat pocket to the salesperson.
I want you to make a ring like this,
Humphrey said while showing a beautiful ring design.
Please make it a smaller size.
Humphrey immediately took out his credit card for payment. After that, he went straight to the car.
Shall we eat first?
Humphrey nodded and drove the car to a restaurant.
I'll wait inside,
Sylvia said, and got off and entered the restaurant. First, Humphrey smiled sarcastically and pressed the accelerator to leave the restaurant. After a few minutes of driving, Humphrey stopped his car not far from the gate of a school. Humphrey rolled down his window. This was the only school close to his house, so Dot must have gone here. Humphrey raised the windscreen and relaxed while waiting for school to end. Humphrey put down his mobile phone as the school gates opened, and many students poured out. Humphrey smiled when he saw Dot's figure, but his smile quickly faded when he saw a man approaching his girl. He even ruffled Dot's hair as if they were very close.
Damn, they're even laughing together.
Humphrey cursed in annoyance and immediately drove the car as Dot began to walk away from the school gate. Humphrey drove slowly behind Dot. He had to ascertain the situation before pulling Dot into his car. When it was quiet enough, Humphrey quickly got out of the car and ran over to Dot.
Ah, Mr. Humphrey.
Dot was shocked when her hand was pulled and pushed into the car.
You haven't eaten yet, right? Why don't we eat together?
Dot looked at Mr. Humphrey with a look that was hard to interpret. What exactly did her young master want? Isn't he getting married soon? Dot's eyes suddenly glazed over as she recalled what her mother had said this morning, that Mr. Humphrey was getting married. Dot didn't understand, but there was a feeling of unwillingness in her heart. Humphrey accidentally glanced at Dot, and he could see that she was on the verge of tears.
Is she afraid of me?
Humphrey thought confusedly, then smiled amusedly. And how could she not be scared after what he did?
Don't be scared. I'm not going to hurt you,
Humphrey said, making Dot's body stiffen and her hands reflexively hug her own body.
Where are we going?
Dot asked softly as the car Humphrey was driving past the gate. Humphrey glanced at Dot but didn't say anything. After all, the girl would know later when they arrived at their destination.
Sir, I have to go home.
Dot said again, making Humphrey sigh. After driving for 2 hours, the car driven by Humphrey finally entered a large courtyard. Humphrey got out first and then opened the door for Dot.
Where is this place?
at my house.
Humphrey said, and took Dot by the arm into the house he bought without his parents' knowledge. Humphrey took Dot into his room on the first floor.
Rest first, I'll prepare food for both of us.
After saying that, Humphrey immediately walked out of the room, but, on the other hand, could only surrender and lay down on the bed until she unconsciously fell asleep because her body was very tired. An hour passed. Humphrey entered the room with a tray in his hand.
She's sleeping.
Humphrey mumbled and put his cooking on the table. Without further ado, Humphrey immediately contacted his friend who would help him confirm Dot's pregnancy. Humphrey opened the door and let his friend in.
Wow, she's so young.
Go do your job,
Arnold said and took out an injection from his doctor's bag.
This liquid will make it easier for this young girl to conceive. And make sure you do it again after this.
Humphrey nodded in understanding and escorted Arnold to the door after he had done his job. Humphrey stepped into her room to find Dot already awake.
What's wrong?
Humphrey asked worriedly.
My stomach hurts, mister,
Dot said, making Humphrey nod in understanding. It might be the effect of the injection Arnold gave her.
Maybe it's because you're hungry. Look, I've prepared some food. Eat first and then take a shower,
Humphrey said, getting food for Dot.
Sir, I don't want to eat. I want to go home. Mom will.
After we eat, we'll go home.
Humphrey cut in quickly, making Dot nod and eat her food immediately.
Sir, I'm done eating.
Dot's interjection made Humphrey nod and pick up Dot's dirty plate.
Now take a shower. After that, we go straight home.
Humphrey stared at Dot's back, which disappeared after the bathroom door was closed. She's so obedient, Humphrey thought to himself. Humphrey drove the car leisurely while Dot could only wring her fingers uneasily. It was late, and she wasn't home yet. Her mum must be very worried. Humphrey smiled slightly and glanced at the deserted road his car was traveling on. It was so quiet that only the sound of birds chirping could be heard, considering they were traveling through such a dense forest road.
Sir, please go faster. Why is the car stopped, sir?
Dot asked in panic when the car driven by her master suddenly stopped. Humphrey pretended to panic.
The car ran out of petrol,
Humphrey explained, making Dot glare.
Then what do we do, sir? I have to go home.
Are you the only one who wants to go home?
Humphrey snapped, as if annoyed, then opened his car door and got out, who was afraid of being left alone. Got out and followed Humphrey.
Sir, wait for me,
Dot shouted and ran to match Humphrey's pace. With Humphrey smiled a little and continued to step into the forest area. But, on the other hand, had already pressed her body close to Humphrey's.
Master,
Dot called out fearfully while Humphrey was still walking until they saw a large tent standing firmly in the middle of the forest. Humphrey grinned and stepped over to light a torch with the lighter he had brought. Dot gaped in amazement at the sight in front of her. 2 large torches were lit in front of the white tent. Humphrey took Dot by the arm to enter the tent, but Dot was amazed at the contents of the tent. There was a large bed in the center of the tent with rose petals sprinkled on it. And let's not forget the small candles lit around the tent. Humphrey hugged Dot's body from behind and then moved slowly towards the bed.
Mr. A.
Humphrey smiled and pushed Dot's body onto the bed. Dot glared and tried to get up, but her body was pushed again.
Sir, please, I want to go home,
Dot said fearfully, but Humphrey shook his head.
We'll spend the night here.
Dot shook her head with tears welling up in her beautiful eyes.
Mister, not again.
Dot's sobs made Humphrey try to calm the young girl down.
Listen, if you obey, I will be nice to you. But if you rebel, then I can also be rude.
Dot shook her head.
But, Mr.
Do you want me to sack your mum, huh?
She didn't want her mum to be sacked. If her mum lost her job, then they would have nowhere to go. She would also have to drop out of school, as all expenses were paid by her mum's employer. Humphrey returned to being gentle by stroking Dot's beautiful face.
Therefore obey and I will give you whatever you want. What do you want 'em? Money? Jewelry?
Dot bit her lower lip lightly, then shook her head.
Sir, don't fire my mom. She'll be sad to lose the job and I won't be able to go to school anymore. I want to go to school, sir. I want to be a doctor.
Dot said, innocently, making Humphrey silent for a moment.
All right, I won't sack your mum.
Humphrey tried to play as gently as possible. Humphrey hopes that Dot will get pregnant before her wedding day arrives. It had been 2 weeks since the incident in the tent, and that meant 1 more week for Mr. Humphrey's wedding to take place. Remembering that made Dot turn around and hug Humphrey's body tightly.
Sir.
His sobs made Humphrey return the girl's hug.
What's wrong, Hum?
Dot shook her head and let go of his embrace, then hurriedly pulled up her knickers and straightened her nightgown.
I'm going to bed, sir.
Dot said, and then stepped out of the dining room. The girl had been crying very easily these past few days, sometimes even leaving without saying anything after they made love. Humphrey stroked the back of his neck, gently trying to find the reason behind Dot's change in behavior.
Is Dot pregnant?
Humphrey thought in short. Humphrey smiled at the thought and stepped out of the dining room. He had to confirm Dot's pregnancy as soon as possible. It would be great if she really was pregnant, since the wedding was only a week away. Humphrey stepped out of the dining room and met Helene as he was about to go up the stairs.
Humphrey, son, wait. Ma wants to talk.
What's wrong, Ma?
Nothing. I just want to make sure you're okay.
Helene was silent while staring at her son's back, who slowly disappeared from her sight. Humphrey, her son was getting away. That's what Helene felt.
I'm sorry, Humphrey, but this marriage can no longer be cancelled.
Humphrey entered the house with hurried steps and headed straight for the kitchen. Humphrey smiled when he saw Dot washing vegetables.
What are you doing?
Asked Humphrey, who immediately hugged Dot from behind. Shocked, Dot immediately pushed Humphrey's body away.
Don't hug me again, sir. You're getting married next week.
Dot's words made Humphrey frown. Since when did Dot care about his marriage? Hasn't Dot never brought it up so far?
What's wrong, him? Do you have a problem?
Humphrey asked as gently as possible. Dot brushed off Humphrey's arm that wanted to touch her.
I'm upset with you, sir.
Dot said, making Humphrey frown in surprise.
Upset about what?
Well, I'm upset anyway. I don't know why.
He was even more convinced that Dot was pregnant.
All right, I apologize. Whatever upset you, I apologize.
Is it wrong that Dot doesn't want to see you get married? Dot doesn't want you to get married. Dot also doesn't understand, but every time she remembers that you are getting married, Dot feels sad and wants to cry. Dot's eyes glaze over when she remembers you're getting married.
Dot was probably being influenced by the child in her womb. Humphrey came closer and hugged Dot's body, but Humphrey kissed Dot's forehead gently, and then rubbed the little girl's back.
Don't be sad.
Humphrey whispered softly, making Dot sob even more. Dot hugged Humphrey back tightly.
I'm sorry and don't cry anymore. Now go back to your room and rest.
Dot nodded and wordlessly left the kitchen. Humphrey went to his room. Helene knocked the door with a smile and stepped inside.
Selvy's family is coming to the house tonight. They want both families to get to know each other before the wedding.
What's wrong, son? Are you unhappy?
Does it matter? Is Humphrey's happiness important to Mummy?
Of course, son. Your happiness comes first in this house. We do everything for your happiness.
Mummy is right. Humphrey's happiness comes first until I forget to look for my own happiness.
Humphrey said in a sarcastic tone.
Now you can come out. I will come down when the family comes.
Humphrey said and walked away, leaving Helene speechless.
Is Humphrey unhappy?
Helene thought uneasily. Selvia's family had arrived a few minutes ago. Helene and Bascoro were busy welcoming them, while Humphrey was silent beside his parents.
Humphrey, meet Selvia's grandmother and grandfather.
Humphrey nodded indifferently and downed his drink. Humphrey was cool during the conversation until his eyes caught the figure of Dot, who came with a plate of cake in her hand. Humphrey's eyes stared intently at Dot's figure serving the cake on the table. Humphrey glared, then immediately caught Dot's body, who tripped over the edge of the carpet.
Can't you be careful?
Never mind, Humphrey. Why yell at Dot's son? Dot just wasn't careful enough.
Humphrey let out a rough breath and sat back down. He almost had a heart attack because he saw Dot almost fall. However, it was not safe for Dot to fall while she was pregnant.
Where's Diana? Why are you serving cake? Never mind. Go back to your room and get some rest.
Helene and everyone else who was there looked at Humphrey with different thoughts. Humphrey realized, but was reluctant to defend himself.
I'm going back to my room.
Wait, son, at least show Sylvia around her house, even though she will be living here after marriage.
Helene said, making Humphrey sigh, and then without saying anything he left the living room. Helene signaled for Sylvia to follow Humphrey, which
let them approach.
Helene said after Sylvia and Humphrey left the living room. Humphrey took Sylvia to the garden in his house.
Wow, very beautiful.
Sylvia's praise made Humphrey mutter briefly. Humphrey had just seen Dot's figure walking towards the swimming pool.
What did you see?
Sylvia asked, making Humphrey clear his throat briefly.
Wait here. I'll get a drink.
Humphrey said, then immediately moved away. Actually, Humphrey wanted to catch up with Dot, who was doing who knows what in the pool. Humphrey walked casually, then immediately ran when he saw Dot wanting to enter the pool.
Dot, Dot.
Humphrey called loudly, then immediately hugged Dot's tiny body.
What are you doing? The pool water is so cold you'll catch a cold.
But sir, I suddenly want to swim here.
You want to swim now? Do you really want to?
Yes, sir.
Dot's reply made Humphrey stare at the pool.
Okay, we'll swim together.
Humphrey's decision made Dot glare, but before she could protest, her tiny body was carried and slowly entered the pool. Dot spontaneously hugged Humphrey's neck when they were fully in the water.
It's cold.
Dot complained. Humphrey carried Dot's body to the side of the pool. Humphrey pulled Dot's arm to hold on to the edge of the pool.
Humphrey.
Damn.
Humphrey cursed. He had forgotten that Sylvia was there.
Humphrey, where are you?
Hearing his name being called, Humphrey immediately submerged himself into the water and left Dot on the surface.
Who are you? Why are you swimming here?
Dot stared at a woman who was suddenly beside the pool. Was just exercising. Sylvia gave Dot a strange look and then stepped away. Dot sighed loudly. As Sylvia walked away, Humphrey appeared and immediately kissed Dot greedily on the lips. Then they stepped slowly towards the changing room beside the pool. The sobbing of someone who kept disturbing his sleep made Humphrey open his eyes slowly.
Dot.
Humphrey NBSP was shocked and immediately got out.
Why are you in my room?
Humphrey asked, confused.
I am hungry, sir.
Dot's outburst left Humphrey speechless for a while.
Hungry? If you're hungry, eat. There's food in the fridge.
Humphrey said, a little annoyed.
But I want to eat fried rice made by you.
Dot said with a sob, making Humphrey look at Dot closely. Is this what is called cravings?
That's it. Let's go to the kitchen.
How could he let Dot and her future child starve? When they arrived at the kitchen, Dot took the initiative to take out all the ingredients to make fried rice, then stepped away to let Humphrey do the rest. Humphrey skillfully made the fried rice, making Dot chuckle in amazement.
How come you can be such a good cook?
Humphrey nodded as he stirred the fried rice. He often cooked when he was abroad. Humphrey NBSP poured the rice onto a plate and brought it to Dot.
Slow down.
Humphrey admonished Dot when he saw how she looked like she hadn't eaten in days.
This is delicious.
What's wrong?
Humphrey asked when Dot suddenly stopped eating.
I feel nausea.
Humphrey immediately got up and chased Dot, who was spitting out her food in the sink. Humphrey massaged Dot's nape gently.
Just spit it all out,
Humphrey said as he smoothed Dot's hair to avoid getting vomit. Dot cried, making Humphrey worried. Dot held her stomach.
It hurts, mister. It hurts.
Dot's outburst prompted Humphrey to pick her up and carry her upstairs. Humphrey entered her room and laid her down on her bed.
Still hurting?
Humphrey asked worriedly. Humphrey stepped over to get some eucalyptus oil, then returned and coated Dot's stomach with the oil. Humphrey rubbed Dot's stomach gently. Dot's sobs made Humphrey panic even more. He was afraid of his child's condition in Dot's stomach.
I feel better now. Maybe because I haven't eaten yet.
Why don't you eat, huh? Is there no food?
Just nausea, and I don't feel like eating.
All right, what else do you want to eat? Let me cook.
Just the fried rice is okay.
Wait here. Let me get the fried rice.
Soon Humphrey returned with fried rice and a glass of milk.
Want me to feed you?
Humphrey's offer made Dot nod enthusiastically. Humphrey painstakingly fed Dot little by little until the fried rice was finished.
Drink the milk,
Humphrey said, handing her a glass of milk. Dot complied and immediately drank the milk.
I'm sleepy now,
Dot said as she handed the empty glass to Humphrey. Humphrey nodded and then helped Dot lie down.
Sleep here.
In the morning, Dot woke up early and was shocked to find out where she was. Dot immediately panicked when she remembered what she did last night. She had the audacity to sneak into Mr. Humphrey's room and ask for fried rice, and even slept in his bed. Dot glanced at Mr. Humphrey, who was still asleep, and then moved downstairs slowly. She walked to the door and exited silently. Dot breathed a sigh of relief, then quickly went down to the first floor, then sneaked into her room at the back.
Dot, where have you been? Why didn't you come back to your room last night?
Deanna asked as soon as Dot entered the room.
I, Aunt Misp, was hungry, so I went to the kitchen and fell asleep at the dining table.
Diana shook her head at her daughter's story. Indeed, Mrs. Helene allowed her and Dot to do anything in the kitchen, but that didn't mean her daughter could freely eat her employer's food.
Yes, but don't do that next time. You'll be embarrassed if you get caught by Madame Helene. Take a quick shower and get ready. Let me bring your food here later,
Diana said, making Dot nod and step into the bathroom, while Diana went straight to the kitchen. In the afternoon, after Dot returned from school, she was surprised by the number of cars in the yard, not to mention the many congratulatory bouquets arranged in front of the gate. Dot looked down as she realized the situation. She had forgotten that in 3 days Mr. Humphrey would officially marry someone, and that someone was not her. Dot walked gingerly into her room at the back of the building. There was no one in her room, as her mum must have been busy in the kitchen. Dot sighed and threw her bag away. Her heart ached when it was clear that she and Mr. Humphrey had no relationship whatsoever, and maybe Mr. Humphrey was just playing with her. Dot was pensive for a while, until suddenly her stomach churned violently, and Dot covered her mouth and ran to the bathroom. She washed her mouth and wiped her lips with a tissue, and why has she been feeling nauseous lately? Sometimes she even had a headache, and her body often felt tired. Dot hobbled towards the bed, but her eyes accidentally saw a calendar on her study table. Dot stood up and picked up the calendar. Her monthly schedule was almost 2 weeks late, and that had never happened before. Dot tried to think what could have caused her monthly guest to be late. Was it because she was stressed or tired? Dot spontaneously squealed and held her stomach.
Am I pregnant?
Dot said uneasily, because she is not a child who does not know what the consequences of a relationship between a man and a woman. Moreover, she and Mr. Humphrey had done it several times. Dot's body stiffened, thinking about her future if she was indeed pregnant. It was impossible to hold her accountable since Mr. Humphrey was getting married in 3 days. And who would believe what she said anyway? Everyone would think she was lying if she told them all that. Dot squeezed her hair hard.
What should I do?
Humphrey snuck around the back of the building and entered Dot's room. He had already made sure that Diana would not return to the room. Humphrey could see that the girl was surprised by his arrival. But instead of the warm welcome Humphrey received, the girl gave him a sharp look and then turned her face away. Humphrey stepped closer to Dot and moved to kiss her, but she avoided him.
What are you doing here, sir? Aren't you getting married tomorrow?
Dot said sarcastically, making Humphrey chuckle. His little girl was jealous. Humphrey pulled Dot's body into his arms with a little force because Dot gave resistance.
I miss you and our child.
Dot shook her head and pushed Humphrey's body so hard that Humphrey's arms around her broke free. Dot hurriedly moved away.
Please leave my room, sir. I don't want to see you again,
Dot said, while looking down, making Humphrey sigh. Dot must be sulking because of her wedding tomorrow, plus the pregnancy condition that makes her even more sensitized.
Listen, I'm not marrying Sylvia tomorrow,
Humphrey said, making Dot look up.
Really? But why?
Humphrey smiled and moved closer to Dot's body.
Because of you. Because I love the young girl who stands before me now.
Me?
Humphrey nodded and hugged Dot's body.
Yes, I like you.
Humphrey kissed Dot's forehead gently.
There will be a wedding tomorrow, but not between me and Sylvia.
What Humphrey said, making Dot look at her master. Humphrey stroked Dot's head affectionately.
Tomorrow will be our wedding day.
How? How could you, sir? I'm just a servant.
Shut up.
Humphrey interrupted and took Dot by the arm to the bed.
Get some rest and don't think about anything. I promise we'll get married tomorrow,
said Humphrey, who helped Dot lie down.
You're not lying?
Humphrey nodded and wrapped his arms around Dot.
I'm not lying. Now go to sleep.
Dot closed her eyes. Humphrey walked out of the room.
Humphrey, are you done getting ready?
Helene's shout from outside his room made Humphrey immediately stepped open the door.
Wow, my son is so handsome.
Helene praised, but Humphrey only nodded briefly.
Come on! Come on!
Downstairs, everyone had gathered, both the family and the workers in the house. Humphrey sat on the sofa and glanced at Dot, who was standing behind the other workers. Helene smiled warmly, and then his eyes accidentally caught Humphrey's gaze. Helene's smile immediately faded, replaced by an uncomfortable look on his face.
What's wrong?
Helene shook his head and stood up.
We'll just leave right away. No need for ceremony and prayers,
Helene said, making everyone surprised, including Humphrey.
Let's go straight away.
Dot, oh my God.
Everyone's attention was immediately drawn to the sound of Diana screaming. Humphrey immediately ran and took over Dot's unconscious body. Helene came over.
Somebody help Dot,
Helene shouted, causing some of the workers to come over, but Humphrey was immediately stared at.
Humphrey, let the other workers take care of Dot. We have to leave now,
Helene said, but Humphrey didn't care. He carried Dot's body, then walked to his room upstairs.
Call the doctor.
Humphrey's command left Helene speechless. What exactly is happening? Is her dream from last night going to come true? I mean, the dream that his son impregnated Dot. Ellen and Bascoro soon caught up with Humphrey, as well as Diana. Humphrey stroked Dot's head as she lay unconscious on her large bed. No one made a sound until the doctor entered the room.
Please check her, doctor.
The doctor quickly examined Dot's body.
How is it?
Are you her husband?
No, doctor. She's our maid's daughter.
Helene interrupted quickly.
It is best to take her to the hospital for a detailed examination. The most I can tell you is that this girl may be pregnant.
Helene and Diana suddenly put on shocked faces, while Bascoro immediately looked at his son.
Thank you, doctor.
After the doctor left, Bascoro immediately approached Humphrey.
Explain what really happened.
What the hell? Why does Humphrey have to explain? Dot must be pregnant with a friend from school.
That's my son Ma, your grandson,
Humphrey said, making Bascoro reflexively slap Humphrey's face. Oh my God, Helene shouted, and helped Humphrey, who staggered backwards.
That's definitely not true. Humphrey couldn't have done that.
It's true. Dot is pregnant with my child.
What Humphrey said, making Helene's body weak.
Helene?
Called Bascoro, who helped support his wife's body.
This is impossible. How could this happen? You're getting married today, Humphrey. How could you?
Humphrey called out as Helene's body suddenly became unconscious. Bascoro carried his wives to their room.
Young master, is it true?
Asked Diana, who still looked shocked.
I'll explain later. Now please take care of Dot first. I have to go downstairs.
Diana nodded, and Humphrey rushed out of the room. Humphrey entered his parents' room. Helene was awake, but his face looked very pale.
Humphrey, please marry Sylvia.
Humphrey shook his head in disbelief.
Mom, Dot is pregnant, and it's my child.
It would be a shame for both families if the marriage was cancelled.
Bascoro patted Humphrey on the shoulder.
Papa and Mama can't be mad at you for what happened. But one thing you must know is that the marriage between you and Sylvia cannot be cancelled. The two families could turn on each other.
So, son, marry Sylvia, and then you can marry Dot. That's the only choice you have.
Humphrey was silent for a moment, then looked at his father.
We will treat Dot and her child well as long as you are willing to marry Sylvia.
Bascoro's words made Humphrey clench his fists. His father was threatening him. Humphrey could understand. Helene smiled gently and took Humphrey's fingers.
You want it, son?
Dot, she's still in school and pregnant. What will others say about her and the child? and Papa can't guarantee her well-being if you refuse to marry Sylvia,"
Vascoro said, making Humphrey stand up and walk out of the room. Before actually walking out, Humphrey stopped and looked at his parents intently.
"All right, I will marry Sylvia."
Humphrey and Sylvia stepped into the hotel room where their wedding reception was being held. Humphrey immediately enters the bathroom to clean up while Sylvia takes off her dress and removes her makeup. Sylvia smiled and hugged Humphrey, who had just come out of the bathroom.
"Let go,"
Humphrey said flatly, making Sylvia frown.
"Why, Humphrey? Aren't we married?"
Sylvia asked as she clung to Humphrey's burly arm. Humphrey dismissed Sylvia's arm and walked towards the sofa.
"I'll sleep here, and you can sleep in the bed,"
Humphrey said, making Sylvia smile sarcastically and walk towards Humphrey haughtily.
"Dot, that maid's daughter is pregnant with your child, right?"
Sylvia asked, making Humphrey, who had been lying down, get up immediately.
"How do you know?"
Sylvia smiled and moved to sit on Humphrey's lap.
"At the swimming pool that time. I saw her,"
Sylvia whispered while rubbing Humphrey's chest. Humphrey gave Sylvia a sharp look, then brushed Sylvia's fingers off his chest.
"Don't be angry, dear. I don't mind sharing my husband with Dot as long as you obey me. It's good that the girl is pregnant, because I have no intention of getting pregnant. You know, I'm a model, and my beautiful body shouldn't be ruined by giving birth to a child. But when it comes to bed, I can satisfy you. We can satisfy each other."
Sylvia's whisper made Humphrey smile slightly. Humphrey reached out his fingers to stroke Sylvia's smooth face.
"I thought you were a good woman, but apparently you are quite naughty,"
Humphrey whispered, making Sylvia chuckle.
"How is it? Do you like my offer?"
Sylvia asked in a teasing tone. Humphrey nodded and squeezed Sylvia's chest hard. Sylvia sighed mischievously, with a lustful look.
"Take a shower first,"
Humphrey says, making Sylvia get off his lap, then rushed to the bathroom.
"Wait for me, Humphrey. I won't be long."
As soon as Sylvia entered the bathroom, Humphrey's face immediately changed. He didn't intend to disturb Sylvia, but she turned out to be quite cunning. Humphrey smiled and picked up his mobile phone.
"Come to my room,"
Humphrey said, then immediately switched off his mobile phone. Humphrey stood up and stepped towards the door when his hired man arrived. Humphrey opened the door and invited a man with a similar stature to himself to enter.
"You know your job, right?"
Humphrey asked, making the man nod in certainty.
"Good, and don't let her know that it wasn't me who fucked her,"
Humphrey said, and then stepped into the hotel room right across from his room. Humphrey closed the door and climbed into bed. There were many things he had to do from now on, and the first thing he had to do was marry Dot. He would get rid of Sylvia slowly. In the morning, Humphrey rushed back to the room where Sylvia was staying. Sylvia was already awake and sitting against the headboard.
"You're too much, Humphrey. Look at my body."
"I'm going home first,"
Humphrey said, then stepped out of there. He didn't care about Sylvia's whining and screaming. Humphrey arrived home and immediately searched for Dot.
"Where's Dot?"
Humphrey asked as Helene approached.
"Dot is resting in her room, son."
Humphrey, NBSP, stepped towards the back of the building. Helene followed his son's lead.
"Where is your wife, Humphrey? Did you leave her?"
"Sylvia, she can't walk."
What Humphrey, NBSP, said brought a smile to Helene's face. That meant her son and Sylvia had done it, and it was only a matter of time before Sylvia was declared pregnant. Humphrey entered Dot's room and with slow steps approached Dot's body lying on the bed. Humphrey stroked Dot's forehead until she woke up. Humphrey smiled and helped Dot sit down.
"What's wrong?"
Humphrey asked when Dot just looked down.
You are already married.
Humphrey smiled and took the girl carrying his child into his arms.
"I'm sorry, but I promise after this we will get married. You know what? You're pregnant. Take good care of her because I'm really looking forward to her birth."
After a long silence, Helene finally got the courage to speak.
"Dot, you have to get ready. You will get married today."
After helping Dot bathe and dress, Humphrey carried her back to the living room. All the workers had gathered there, including Diana, who had been sitting uneasily thinking about the fate of her daughter who would become a second wife. Humphrey set Dot down beside Diana and stepped up to the officiant. The wedding ceremony was very simple, with only the officiant witnesses, his parents, and the houseworkers. Humphrey turned around and stepped closer to Dot. Humphrey stretched out his arm for Dot to kiss her, and then Humphrey kissed Dot's forehead.
Don't cry.
Humphrey said as Dot shed tears. For some reason, there was an uneasy feeling in her heart.
What's wrong, home? Nausea again?
Dot shook her head and squeezed the shirt Humphrey was wearing. Humphrey looked at Dot worriedly and carried her tiny body up the stairs. Humphrey opened the door to his room and stepped inside. Humphrey lowered Dot's body gently.
Look, look,
Humphrey asked as he pulled something out of his trouser pocket. Dot looked at the small glowing object with admiration.
Do you like it?
Humphrey put the diamond ring on Dot's ring finger, then gave the other ring to Dot's hand. Then happily, Dot put the ring on Humphrey's ring finger. Humphrey kissed Dot's forehead gently.
Get some rest. I'm going to my office to take care of something.